I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Abstract Essay, where ideas take shape, thoughts find depth, and every conversation explores the art of thinking beyond the obvious. And today I have my special guest, no other than Mr. Howard Lewis. Welcome, Mr. Howard, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
I can't hear you. There's a problem with the sound at your end.
Mr. Howard, can you please introduce more about yourself that I miss? Can you hear me now?
Sure. Okay. Yes, I can hear you now. It's absolutely fine. So, well, first of all, good evening. Obviously, I'm Howard Lewis. I am the founder and host of Offline. And Offline is basically a platform to build great relationships, wherever they may be. I don't really care so much about how old people are, where they all come from. But I learned over recent times that people are becoming very, very disengaged by technology, and people's ability to actually talk and share and physically interact was becoming diminished. Anyway, I used to host a dinner called Offline. Every 2 months or so, I invite maybe 30 people for dinner at my club, and I would share stories about the offline philosophy. And offline is really a celebration of the virtues of randomness and serendipity, which I think are terribly important and rather overlooked in the modern age. So the dinner was simply an excuse to bring together people who were completely different, but over their age, their background, their gender, their income, their colour. It was of no consequence to me at all. But what I cared about very much was that they were all givers. And by that I mean that people were open and they were curious and interested in the lives of other people. Anyway, the bottom line is I did it for 15 years. I did mainly private, but also corporate dinners as well. And I wrote a book about it, which came out in March. It's called, in fact, Leave Your Phone at the Door. And it contains a bunch of stories, observations, anecdotes, insight about my view of the world, obviously embracing the offline philosophy. So that, in essence, is what I do. And obviously the book, in many ways, is almost a kind of a culmination of all the dinners and events I hosted over very many years beforehand.
So, Mr. Howard, tell us, can you unpack that paradox for us? How to surrendering control lead to a richer outcomes?
Look, I think control is actually the root of the problem. Most people are far more concerned by what may go wrong than may go right. This idea somehow you're taken out of your comfort zone, you don't have the ability to control or direct the conversation. But by the same token, if you allow yourself to be a little bit vulnerable, if you allow yourself to be taken into unfamiliar areas, very often, in fact, you find that people welcome it. It's not as though somehow you do something different and everybody's judging you, as though somehow they're giving you a mark out of 10. Nobody really cares about that kind of thing. And I think the difficult thing is that most people are far more concerned with what may go wrong than may go right. And I don't really care about that kind of thing very much. And offline, in a way, was a platform to enable people simply to gather without this terrible fear that there'll be some disaster around the corner. So I actually didn't worry terribly much about things going slightly awry or somehow failing to keep the schedule. It didn't matter. I found if you bring people together, there is a tendency for people to forget their inhibition and their fear if you create the right ambience. And at offline, because the variety of people was so great, in a sense, it didn't allow people to be too comfortable. In a sense, I wanted people to be a little bit adventurous. I wanted people to ask questions or be put in a slightly unfamiliar situation because in the modern world, this notion of control, whereby you know who you're talking to, you know what they're going to say, you know what your response may be. And indeed, you'll probably do the same thing again next week as well. In my view, it's very negative. You need to, in a sense, allow human curiosity to prevail. Not all the time, but enough of the time. Because I think, as humans, that sense of exploration, that sense of discovery, that sense of learning is all around us. And most people The technology doesn't help, of course, particularly social media. Most people are far more concerned that there's some scary monster around the corner waiting to trip them up if they're taken into unfamiliar territory.
Mr. Howard, what was the personal experience or observation that made you first question a cultural obsession with hyper planning and realize there was a strong case for randomness?
Look, I think randomness is all around us. I mean, our very creation was a random act. The idea somehow you live your life in some kind of denial that you must be able to influence events at all times. No, I think people, unfortunately, are on the whole followers rather than leaders and think things through for their own benefit. They're much more concerned, in a sense, to not be either ridiculed or criticized or mocked or somehow questioned. And I think to myself, that's a bad thing. You want to be somehow invited to make your case or put on the spot or ask difficult questions. Not all the time, but enough of the time. I think the difficult thing is that we live in a world which is very, very visual. It's very competitive. There's an immediacy to everything. There's awful nagging fear that unless somehow you are up with events, you're no longer relevant. And the truth of the matter is, that's a nonsense. Everybody's relevant in their own way. The difficult thing, I think, is that a lot of people rather imagine somebody outside is keeping score. How well they did something, how smartly dressed they were, how entertaining their conversation may be. It doesn't really matter a great deal. What matters most of all is you are human and you show your frailties and your weaknesses and your idiosyncrasies, because that's what makes people interesting. I don't want to meet people, frankly, who are always telling me how smart they are, how they got the answers, how much money they made. That is the dullest conversation in the world.
And Mr. Howard, are you advocating for total chaos or it is about
No,
strategic incorporation of spontaneously? Or how does you define productive randomness?
look, I think we are all productive in our own way. You can be productive simply walking on the road to the station. That's productive. Taking the dog for a walk. That's productive. Yeah. I think the difficult thing is a lot of these things are not measured in any kind of straightforward way. It's about how you feel about the activity you are doing. Some people walk with a spring in their step. Some people idle by. Some people take a slight diversion. Some people stop to say hello to somebody on the other side of the street. I think this notion of being productive is also unhelpful in some ways. I think there's also some has an element of performance. I've got to do something with some meaning or some consequence, or where somehow I can feel, yes, I've made progress. And I think to myself, no, that's wrong. Just live your life. Be aware, be interested, be curious, ask questions. There are some very simple devices to connect people which are overlooked all too often. Things like simply saying good morning or waving to somebody, smiling. Smiling's not very difficult. Everybody can smile. It doesn't require some complicated maneuver. I think the reality of the matter is that we live in a world where sadly people are very quick to apply labels. Somebody's either quiet or they're loud or they're foolish or they talk too much or they've got a particular disposition or whatever it may be. And I think one needs to allow people the opportunity to make mistakes. Nobody comes to a subject as an expert. Even the experts started somewhere. And I just feel somehow if you are only concerned with always putting your best foot forward, always representing the very best version of yourself, I think you do yourself a disservice. You want to see people who are rounded. You don't want people who somehow do everything to the nth degree. That's not interesting at all. The last thing I want to do, frankly, is go to an offline dinner with 30 people like myself. Because one of me is enough. I want variety. I want unpredictability. I want to be stretched. I want to be provoked. These are all good things. These are all building blocks in life. And I don't think people exercise them enough.
And for dedicated planner listening to this, what is the small, low stake way that they can introducing a bit of randomness in their week?
Look, I think it depends a little bit on the nature of the event. I mean, obviously, if you're putting together an event which is of a certain size, the dynamic does change a bit. I mean, you have to understand one thing. typically when I hosted a dinner, there'll be probably, I don't know, 30, 35 people. So there was an intimacy to it, and it was almost like going to a big dinner party. You can probably see from the images in front of you right now. I didn't worry terribly much, though, somehow whether people felt as though the event achieved anything. I think what I cared about most of all is what people felt, what they felt about the evening, what they felt about themselves, what about the company, the food, the setting, everything. I didn't worry. And I think in a way this is a big problem for event planners generally. This idea that whatever you do has to have some kind of desired outcome. Actually, sometimes you don't need an outcome at all. I can remember somebody said to me many years ago, somebody came to offline a few times, very successful entrepreneur, and she said to me, one of the reasons actually offline works so well is precisely because there's no agenda, there's no outcome. Just bring together 30 odd people in a room, whatever their background, whether they're in banking, whether they're in tech, whether they're in fashion and art, and whatever they may be, an academic, if you're retired, I think what people do. But when you bring that element of the uncertainty and the unknown, people pay more attention. When there's those signposts telling you which way the conversation is going to go, your antenna, you're a bit more sensitive. So I would say for event planners, notwithstanding the fact, yes, you may have all kinds of commercial obligations, maybe you've got sponsors or whatever else it may be, but allow people to explore and to make mistakes and ask silly questions, ask things they probably wouldn't have asked ordinarily. But all the while, what you want to do is you want to actually create the human factor. Don't worry too much about the event. What matters most of all is the people and what they get out of it, and watching them engage and interact, and whether they're sharing, arguing, eating, drinking, flirting, whatever it may be, but allow them to somehow enjoy the space. Don't worry too much about whether somehow things go terribly wrong. I can tell you that at an offline dinner, if A didn't get on with B, I just put B on another table. Don't like the wine, we'll get a bottle. But what I didn't do is put together all kinds of very complicated contingency plans just in case. But one does need to improvise in life. And offline, I welcome improvisation, people thinking on their feet. And event planners, again, the desire to be uber professional, the desire to tick every box, the desire to make it even better than last year. Doesn't really matter a great deal. And obviously, I'm not generalizing hugely because my events were by their very nature smaller and deliberately so. When you're doing an event for 300 people, or 3,000 people for that matter, different set of rules. But I think what matters most of all is how you people feel. And if you get that bit right, the content of the actual event isn't so important.
Mr. Howard, does randomness help us access what scientists called adjacent possible?
Say it again. I didn't quite catch that. Say it again to me.
Does randomness help us access what scientists call the adjacent possible?
Oh, I don't know what scientists say. Goodness me, I'm too busy with all the scientists. All I know is, Daniel, when it comes to the crunch, what matters most of all is just what you give. And if you give, most people will respond in kind. The problem in the modern world is sadly that people are very much built to live their lives by the maximum of give and take. In other words, I give you something, I'm taking something back in return. It's very commercial, it's very transactional. I much prefer to give and then give again. Because when you give a second time without being asked for anything in return, you open up all kinds of possibilities. And you start to imbue your counterpart with probably the two most important things of all. One is trust, and the other is confidence. Hugely important. And if you allow people that freedom, suddenly all bets are off. So as for the scientists, I have no idea what they will say. I mean, I don't read that kind of thing, so I have no idea what they're talking about. I can say one thing. I am not really qualified in anything. I just brought together people over dinner because I recognized there was a very severe lack of connectivity face to face. And it's been borne out by the fact that over a period of years, I never actually counted. I must have hosted, I don't know, 50, 60 dinners. I never kept track. But a lot of people came from all over, some very successful, some starting out in life. And that's also great. Mixing them all together, put them slightly on the back foot, ask or in a sense, expect different things from them. It's all, in my view, a positive. But I'm not governed by the fear of failure. I accept things will go wrong. That's life. But I don't agonize over the small details because that's my mind is just negative energy. Why do you want to worry about all things that can go wrong? Concentrate on what goes right. I'm a great believer of seeing what I call the 80-20 rule, whereby if 80% of the event is wonderful, the 20% which is not, we can all survive. We'll work around it. It's not a big deal. So I just think to myself, the scientific element, the analytical side as to what makes an event successful, I think is overblown. I think in a way, a lot of it's down to instinct. It's also the ability to read the room. What do you feel? I can tell you, for example, I used to speak over the course of the evening, telling various stories. I speak at the very beginning for 3, 4, 5 minutes. Then I speak a bit longer after the first course, and then longer again after the second course. But there were occasions where the dinner had such great flow, I just didn't bother with the last bit. Nobody ever left an offline dinner saying, "Oh, by the way, it's like you missed out the third section. I feel as though I've been shortchanged." Then people said, "No, I had a wonderful time. Great to meet people I never met ordinarily. Great experiences. I learned different things. Some people I'll see again, no doubt." But all the while, the crux of the matter is, you see, that if you allow people the ability to, in a sense, share their vulnerability, you give them permission to be vulnerable, suddenly all kinds of wonderful things start to emerge.
Okay, Mr. Howard, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people, my other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season. Abstract poetry in second season, my book 101 review in fifth season too. Comedy 101 in second season, and my food 101 in fifth season as well. Geography 101 in fourth season, my baby podcast law 101 and mental health 101. Love letters in third season, and movie 101 review and music 101 in fourth season, and science 101 and sex 101 in each season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So, Mr. Howard, tell us finally if you could challenge our listeners to one act of randomness this week, what would it be?
One act of randomness over the week.
Yes, please.
I think it'd be rather fun, on the one hand, to talk to somebody very much older than yourself and somebody very much younger. In other words, you will find that small people have a great deal of wisdom in a strange way. They're quite direct. They say what they think. They don't worry very much whether you got the right words or the right emphasis. And older people, retired people, have often a great deal of wisdom of their own, which is somehow rather forgotten because somehow you're not deemed to be relevant when you're not actually a working person. And I think just the idea you might have a conversation, it may be a very brief conversation, but it's in passing, maybe on the subway, maybe in the park, but you talk to a small child, a 6-year-old child, an 8-year-old child, an older person, maybe, again, sitting on the bench with you, but in a sense, with a very, very different life experience to your own. Obviously, a small child has a very limited perspective just because they haven't lived that long, but never, because I think somehow they've got a rather pure approach. Small children are not wrapped up and bound up by all kinds of society's determinations. Children, when they're little, have a great spontaneity. In a sense, you can have the most interesting conversations with them. So I would say to you, if you're asking me a random thing which is not difficult, it's not that you've got to find a small child somewhere, which you couldn't do ordinarily, or find an old person, but engage in the conversation, and you may be very surprised at where the conversation may take you.
Mr. Howard, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world, and hoping for more and more empowering advocacy or offline to come or randomness to come. So can you please invite our listeners to support your advocacy or whatever projects that you're doing right now?
Well, my book is actually called Leave Your Phone at the Door. And the title in some ways is self-explanatory, but it's also about actually allowing yourself to be taken offline and take a different path through the world. Because I think most people, as I said earlier, are far too concerned about what may go wrong. The book's available via Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and many other outlets. Buy it, share it, and enjoy it. Thank you.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Howard Lewis, because if you support him for sure, more and more empowering books like this to come. So, Mr. Howard, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Yes, pleasure.
Monica, people, see you episode